chance for this Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences series of conversations with academics to answer questions on what to think about and how to succeed when applying for lectureship positions. My name is Diane, and I'm a careers consultant in Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences at the University of Cambridge Career Service. I'll be in conversation with Professor Anna Alexandrova, who is a professor in philosophy of science at the University of Cambridge. Thank you very much for joining us today, Anna. I wonder if you could start off just by telling us a little bit about yourself and your path to this position.
I came to Cambridge from University of Missouri, St. Louis, which was my first job out of graduate school. I came to academia more generally because in some ways it was a solution to a very practical problem for me. Of course, I always loved ideas and philosophizing and research and sharing them. But mainly, I just didn't want to go back to Russia. And I needed a way to be legal in the West. I needed a way to maintain my immigration status. And I very quickly realized that staying in line and being good in academic stuff is that kind of pathway for me. So in some ways, it was a very unglamorous decision and not at all a romantic one. And I think that is different from many of us who are trying to decide whether academia is the right place for them. I didn't have to make that decision because it was kind of forced on me, and then it just grew on me, right? And after a while, you spend enough time in it, and sort of your personality changes around it, and you you do it because you're good at it and you love it, and because nothing else quite appeals.
Sounds like it started out as a very pragmatic decision for you.
Very pragmatic.
Very interesting. Can you tell us now a bit about the different aspects of your role and how you go about balancing your time between research and teaching, say?
As many colleagues, I am roughly equally balanced between research and teaching, and a little bit less with administration added on. And each day is a balancing act between how much of my time is going to go to what. Every email that comes in sets off a complex cost-benefit analysis in my mind about how much time I should be dedicating to what are the primary responsibilities, and what is a fringe activity, what is it that is necessary and what is desirable. And that in itself, that kind of big decision is very difficult to make sometimes. Evened out. I have some priorities. I don't let down students. They always come first in term time. Their time is my time, is their time, and I try not to let down co-authors and colleagues. But other things, do I reply to each email that comes in from outside, asking about my view on something or asking about input on something? These are, sometimes I have to say no, and that in itself is very difficult to figure out how to say no in a way that's to still respect people's work and appreciate them reaching out.
My next question is, how does your teaching load vary depending on your grant income?
It doesn't vary that much because when I do receive, luckily, grants, out of, say, 7 terms of a grant, only 1 might have a teaching buyout in it. And this is because, both because it's important to pull your weight with colleagues, and also because working with students from undergraduates to PhD is one of the great pleasures. So that is not what I necessarily want to get rid of. I've worked very hard to perfect my lectures. I worked very hard to make them accessible to students from very different disciplines, and to convince colleagues from different disciplines to send their students to my lectures. So I have not been on leave in Michaelmas in a long, long time, precisely because I love teaching philosophy of economics so much. Sometimes, of course, I will need to excuse myself, usually in Easter term, when there is less teaching and more examining, to do more grant work. But no, it doesn't vary that much.
And what would you say you like the most about being in academia? And is that different from what you might have expected?
It's a joy and a privilege to talk ideas with people on a daily basis, and to make that part of your life, and to have students bring up the best in you, and to help them bring up the best in themselves, and to grow, and to watch ideas percolate and watch them grow into something bigger, push each other to be excellent, really, to be the best versions of thinkers that we can be. I don't think that's something that ever gets old. It doesn't grow. It doesn't, I don't get accustomed to it and get adapted to it and grow jaded. It is a wonderful privilege.
Thank you. I'm going to shift to ask you some questions now about the recruitment process and what postdocs and PhDs should be thinking about if they're thinking about going towards an academic career. What would you say are the two things that panels are looking for the most in hiring a new lecturer?
So speaking about lecturer means you are taking on a responsibility for two really big things. First, preserving and enhancing research excellence in your department and in your institution. So you take responsibility for selecting out of these mountains of applications you receive people whose research contribution is likely to be really significant in the long run. Enormously difficult decision, but that's the ideal. But the second thing that you're looking out for is a safe pair of hands. And that is because we have a ship to steer. We have students to graduate and to admit. And we have colleagues who should all be contributing roughly equally, and who should all be working with respect for each other's hours and each other's boundaries and each other's lives. And it is incredibly important. It's a responsibility to yourself and to colleagues and to students to appoint someone who will play ball in this serious, earnest way, who will realize the seriousness and the awesomeness of this task. That is also very hard to judge, but again, that's another ideal that you are aiming at.
Some of those things I'm going to ask you about how you can evaluate that in the process and work that out. So advertisements before an application often include a named departmental contact, so who applicants can get in touch with before they submit. And would you recommend doing that? And what kinds of things could applicants ask to make a better application?
I would recommend only reaching out if you have a genuine question. Very often you won't. It will just be a department in which it's obvious that your research fits. There's no need to ask whether you should apply, right? If it is your field, and if you feel that you can contribute to that field, and if you believe in your work and your work contributes to this field, and that's the department that furthers this field, this is your place. You reach out for a variety of reasons. You reach out if you are perhaps not quite sure whether the definition of the boundaries of the position cover what you do. And then, of course, you reach out if you want to be forthright with the department about the limits of what you might do. And I think it is entirely appropriate to reach out and ask about flexibility of the position. We are all now extremely keen to respect people's circumstances and their boundaries. So I would also reach out for that. But in general, I don't think just because there is a line in the advertisement saying that you you can reach out for questions that you should. I mean, it certainly would never be held against you if you didn't.
So coming back to your ideas of research excellence and safe pair of hands, how can you judge these most important job criteria and others at the paper stage?
Yeah, great question. So let's talk about research excellence. Obviously, a vague concept. What do you do? Well, you look for two markers, really. You look for your own judgment about the sort of the bravery and the audaciousness of a research program, in the way in which this research program doesn't just contribute to what has already been known, but really takes a field in a different directions, perhaps even changes a topic, and does it kind of in a conscious way, you know, with enough mix of ambition and respect for what was already done. I mean, there are different ways of squaring that circle, but you want to see people do it thoughtfully and mindfully and intentionally, and really thinking about how they would like to take a field further, rather than say smaller tasks such as correct a mistake or solve a puzzle. So that's one marker. The other marker you're looking for is a future colleague able to articulate a vision that would also be attractive to, say, other grant funders or journals or publishers. You want to form a judgment, a positive judgment about, I mean, their future fame and their future success with others.
Yeah, that's really helpful. A brave and audacious vision.
A brave and audacious vision, which is nevertheless brave and audacious enough without overstating what you're able to do. Right, so a sense of kind of practicality and realism in a research program is also incredibly important. And you know, someone who just says, you know, I will come and change the field forever and open the eyes that have been blind of, you know, this obvious thing, that's also, that, you know, that can come across as arrogant and unconvincing, given how many very intelligent people are working on these problems. So
how can you go about assessing that? Or what kinds of things impress you or might let somebody down?
Well, I think the most important document you read in relation to that is the research statement. And the research statement is a document that hopefully articulates that vision. Research statement should show the connections between what the applicant has already achieved in terms of publications, grants, writings, and their future plans. I think it is satisfying and an impressive skill when you can connect the things you've been doing into a clear trajectory that inspires both yourself and others. So that's one thing that comes. And of course, then you judge relative to their stage, or where are they in terms of their publications and participation in the profession. And that's a very subtle judgment. You know, you always take into account whether or not people have been slowed down by the pandemic, for example, and you take very seriously if they've indicated that they have had to take leave to care about someone or for health reasons. So you factor that in, and you want to say, given the circumstances that they've worked with, where are they? So are they working at a pace that is acceptable and expected in our profession? So, and I think different fields will have different expectations about the volume of stuff. I remember once my mentor mentioning to me, roughly aim at 2 articles a year. And she said that very consciously as a philosopher to a philosopher. And that, of course, would be a laughable goal to some of my other colleagues who are in fields that publish far, far greater volumes. Well, for example, psychologists, I think, are like that. And it might be a bit too much, on the other hand, for colleagues, for whom one long article in a top journal is worth, a lot more than anything else. You work with relative to the expectations of your discipline, which I think is something that every applicant should be implicitly aware of when they present their achievement.
And it's also, I guess, important and helpful to get that kind of feedback from your mentors and from others in your particular area.
This is the huge importance of mentoring prior to application. We are becoming so much more aware of the richness of implicit knowledge that we pass on to our students, and how people who are unconnected and perhaps are isolated may lack access to it. So then it is very much expected and understood when junior scholars reach out for that sort of mentorship to others, if they don't have it. I mean, this is why this informal networks of mentorships have become so important in not just our university, but the profession as a whole. So I would give my time to junior scholars wherever, if I believe in their work, to help them think strategically about what can they do to present themselves well. We need to foster that as much as we can. I think that's the key to increasing diversity and access to our profession.
Very, very important. If somebody were to try to show on an application that their collaboration or sort of overlaps with work of staff in the faculty already, is there a good way to do that, to show an overlap and a connection without stepping on somebody's toes?
Great question, yeah. Well, you already are articulating with this question this dilemma that you face. You want to show that you fill a gap and that you're doing something that a department needs to cover and needs to do that they aren't currently doing, while also wanting to show that that new thing you're proposing to do and new field that you're proposing to extend into has a really nice and satisfying and fruitful connection to the work that is already ongoing. Yes, that's the holy grail, to be able to show that. I realize difficult, but it is usually possible to say that here is what I'm adding that is not just reproducing what you do, but here is why my research could spur really fruitful collaborations between this and that staff member. And I think that is always a very helpful thing to mention in cover letters. If anything, it shows that you've done your research and you've thought about how you would fit in this department, which is a mark of kind of respect and seriousness with which you approach it. Having said that, I also want to point out that it is important not to drive up expectations about the detail, the nature of cover letters. I mean, I would spend a bit of time, but not too much time, because I think it's unfair on applicants. So in general, I appreciate a little bit of awareness in a cover letter about who we are and how you would fit in.
Now, switching to thinking a bit about teaching, how do you assess teaching in submitted applications and at interview?
Again, I think expectations differ. And in many universities, there is now this kind of, I think, an arms race, more and more detailed teaching statement with a teaching philosophy and a teaching dossier with, a whole bunch of teaching evaluations added in. Some applicants already come with that, but I don't think we should be expecting that, and I certainly don't expect that. I think an applicant should show that they have some basis from which to acquire teaching competencies that are needed to fill the teaching needs of the department, and they need to show that they kind of are thoughtful about it and know how to go about developing syllabi. They've looked into what we teach and perhaps have some things to say about how we could enrich our teaching program, and they show whatever experience they have. But again, I think it's really important not to be overly strict. People can learn to be great teachers from many different bases. It is important, I think, not to drive up expectations for very specific teaching qualifications, because I think people need to remain open-minded in their careers about, what they're going to do. They need to be developing different sides of themselves. They shouldn't be putting all their time into acquiring a teaching experience in yet another area in case, it doesn't work out in the future. So when you read an application, you also take that into account. Well, this person shows that they have taught, they know what is involved in teaching, and they have ideas about it. I can't imagine discounting an application on the basis of insufficiently detailed presentation of syllabi. On the other hand, then comes at the interview stage, you may well add first 5 minutes or first 10 minutes of your presentation should be aimed at, say, more of a student audience, in which case that gives you some sense of what they would be like talking to non-specialists. And of course, then a lot rides on those 10 minutes, and you should, if you come to that, you should take those 10 minutes extremely seriously. And that's the time to invest in preparation, not indiscriminately building your teaching CV.
Now, we do get quite a few questions sometimes on the weight that's given to the job talk and how that's considered by the panel in academic selection.
A job talk is very informative about the attitude of the applicant to the job and to their role. So how seriously they take it, how diligently they stick to time, how clear their slides are or handouts. That reveals a lot about your attitude and whether you are that safe pair of hands. It's nice also if the job talk woos with research excellence, but it is this latter bit that I think we're becoming much more cautious about. If a person has really excellent track record of publications, then a job talk that is otherwise okay but does not inspire me, I don't think I would hold that against. I would consciously stop myself from taking that into account, because this is the bit where we're learning quite how much implicit bias and how much subjectivity there is in what you find to be impressive, when you are hearing a person speak live. So I guess the weights that I put in the job talk is the evidence of seriousness and diligence. If it also can provide the vision and show off the achievements as a researcher, that is great. But I think that is slowly becoming less important in my mind if I also have a fantastic paper record. If the record on paper is a little bit more iffy, if someone has, for example, very junior or had a recent career break, and then of course the job talk can become this positive. I try to make the job talk only a positive kind of evidence, never a negative evidence. But of course it can be a negative evidence if you just don't prepare properly, if you don't respect the time limits, if you give too long answers to questions people pose. So that's a lot to be careful about there.
Yeah, that's a really good way to frame it. Are there any particular pieces of advice for going through academic recruitment with an interdisciplinary profile?
Mm-hmm. Interdisciplinarity is now an expectation in many different fields. We are all expected to be aware of how our work fits in with others, and increasingly we are also asked to do interdisciplinary work. So it is at this point nothing to be ashamed of, and it is something to be to celebrate. As you celebrate your interdisciplinary achievements, you always take care to show the importance of what you do for each of the parent disciplines. And this is the way you show that you understand scholarly standards in the field, and you are engaging with them while also trying to break new ground. Once you get to the interview stage, there will usually be an outside person on the panel who might ask you how your work fits in with other departments. And that's, of course, your opportunity to show those interdisciplinary chops that you've got. You might mention possible research projects that you would like to explore with people in other departments. And you want to show that if they appoint you, you'll be this research powerhouse that will arrive and inject life into what might have been previously a dead area. You have what it takes to inspire people to do the same and to join your research group and to break this exciting new grounds and potentially to explore perhaps contributing to an interdisciplinary MPhil, right, or an interdisciplinary paper. So there are lots of ways of celebrating that. I think we have come to expect that, and we have come to respect people's attempts. And we have also come to understand that when you do that such interdisciplinary work, that can come at the expense of your ability to publish in the more conservative, prestigious venues. And that's also, I think, understood and valued. I do anyhow.
We sometimes, with postdocs and researchers, talk about academic identity and being able to articulate it in those terms. Do you think about that when you are assessing applications, or do you think it's a useful way of thinking?
I think it is really important to recognize that when we open that PDF file with the application, we need to form a judgment about who this person is. And that will always come with some kind of shorthand labels. Or this is the Kantian from Berlin, or something like that, right? And or this is the Kantian who is interested in animals, or something like that. So it is nice to facilitate that kind of identity formation by constructing a certain coherence in what you've done, which is always constructed. So we are perhaps much more messy and diverse in our real lives than we are on paper. I think it is important to have a certain coherence in your research vision. I don't think it is particularly important to have an overall coherence in everything you do. So I think it is nice to have, I actually also have this other side, which is why I would really like to contribute to this other paper that you are teaching that you might not even think I am suitable to.
Yeah,
that is very nice to have this sort of kind of lovely hidden sides. Here are the limits of it. I think it is important to avoid looking opportunistic in your research, that you just publish because you were able to publish something, and you just keep doing things because you were able to plug them in somewhere. And that shows, I think, more like you are playing a game rather than realizing a vision. I think the coherence is only important in showing that you're realizing your vision, but there are different ways of realizing your vision, and it doesn't have to be too coherent. So long as you avoid this appearing disordered and opportunistic, that's the only thing that matters, I think.
What role would you say that academic service plays in assessment?
Academic service, I take it, is a service to your profession, reviewing things for presses, for journals, participating in conference planning.
And service to the institution as well, committee work alongside that.
Well, so that all comes with a safe pair of hands. You want to convey that you know that we're here for a very practical reason, which is keeping an institution going, improving an institution, and graduating students. And you want to convey that you will participate in it, you will do your bit. I don't think junior people should go out of their way to accumulate lines and lines of service on their CV. So long as they have something, and so long as they have some way of conveying it, I think everybody understands that at different stages in your career, you do different levels of service, and you are expected to be a lot more focused on your research at a younger stage and show awareness. Do not do too much.
Thank you. Do you think that an applicant who hasn't moved around very much, for example, just stayed in the UK, would have a disadvantage?
It's a great question, because now academia is changing so much. It will change post-pandemic. It will change with greater awareness of climate costs, of conferencing and traveling. You always have to show awareness of the international standing of your research. And it is a very important ability to show that you are able to publish in international presses and participate in international collaborations and set up perhaps international grant projects. No matter how prestigious your institution is, a good press will not, say, publish an edited volume by people from one place, just all talking to each other. You have to show yourself to be part of a very big conversation. And that is possible to show in very many different ways. You can actually stay put in one place, so long as you stay put in the right way. I do, however, encourage my students and my postdocs to spend time elsewhere and to get to know a culture of another department if it is possible. There are many different ways of being an internationally engaged researcher. Show that on your CV. There are no rules about how you do that.
Be quite creative with how you engage in that broader conversation.
Definitely.
How important do you think networking is in terms of being successful in securing a position?
There are two sides to this question. First is, how important is it to be plugged into a network to be a credible applicant in the first place? Very important. For that, you want, as a junior scholar, to seek out a network of mentors, people who will be giving you advice about different aspects of your life, about which journals to submit to, what conferences to visit, what topics to work on. We all should be seeking out and encouraging and giving our time to that kind of mentorship. Right. And network to that extent is both you kind of taking in from people and you then giving back to that wider network of scholars in your field. I think that is important. Is it important to have networked with the people in the department prior to applying? I really like to think that it's not. I think it is, it's both self-centered and unfair and arrogant to expect that people who kind of come to you before and shown themselves. No, I mean, you're not the only thing in the world, right? The world is a big place. They were doing probably great philosophy prior to even discovering that you existed. It's really important not to reproduce the patterns of privilege by expecting that the applicant would be rotating in your orbit prior to applying. So I think I really like to control that expectation, both in myself and in the colleagues on my panel. But I do think it is really important that whoever we appoint is not a lone wolf, that they play ball, that they work, they give their time to make the profession and the field a good, healthy place. I guess that's the sort of networking that I value.
That's a really helpful perspective. Thank you very much for taking the time.
And thank you for making this series. your listeners should reach out to people for questions and advice. It is important to realize that quite a lot of academic knowledge is implicit and is not written down. And sometimes all it takes is to talk to people to figure it out. And no one would hold it against you if you didn't know these conventions and these unwritten rules.
Thank you, Anna. That's a very helpful last piece of advice as well.